Welcome to this week's episode. I can't wait to share this topic with you today. We're going to be talking about planning for independent business success in 2023. And I'm going to be walking over the next 5 weeks. So, including this week and the next 4 weeks, I'm going to be walking you through a 5-part process for you to plan for the most success in 2023, the best year you've ever had yet in your independent consulting business. So we're going to break this down into bite-sized pieces. You'll be able to go do the work in between episodes and really come out at the beginning of January, in the first couple of weeks of January, with a fully comprehensive, baked out plan for you to have the best year you've ever had in your business. I can't wait to share this with you. This inspiration for this topic came from, I've been doing a few webinars for other organizations, such as MBO Partners and Umbrex. And this is such a hot topic, obviously, this time of year. If you're listening to this in the real time in December and January, as we think about turning the calendar over. And I thought to myself, I really need to share this with the podcast listeners because while those other organizations are so phenomenal, and I am so grateful for the opportunity to speak to their audiences, you are here, and I want to share the very best with you. The only people I share even more with, and the very, very, very best, are my private coaching clients. So you are here listening, and I want to give you the 5-part process for you to plan for your business for next year so that you make it the best year yet. So that is what we're going to be doing. So this week, we're going to be focusing on part 1. And then, like I said, over the coming weeks, I'm going to unfold each of the steps of the process so that by the end of this, if you keep track, keep up, you'll have a plan that you can execute against that sets you up for success in this coming year. Now, one caveat I will say, if you happen to not be listening to this in the real time and is sometime in the future in, let's say, June or August, doesn't matter, don't tune out. Listen to these episodes, these 5 episodes. You'll be able to binge them at that point and put this into place. You can either do it looking back at the year to date, or you can do it looking back at the rolling 12 months. But I can assure you, whenever you do this process, no matter if it's in December or January or August, it doesn't matter, because this is something that will set you up for success no matter what time of year it is. So with that, today I'm going to walk you through the 5 steps so you know exactly what the 5 topics are. And then we're going to dive in deeply into step 1 of the process. So those 5 steps to set you up for business success in 2023, what I call the repeatable goal achieving framework that I've created specifically for independent consulting businesses. Those 5 steps are: step 1, assessing this past year, assessing to understand where you're at right now, just like you would be doing with your clients, probably in some form or fashion, assessing the current state. That's what this first step of this process. And that's what we're going to focus in on today. Then step number 2 is for next week. I'll give you a little preview, a little taste. Step 2 is to set your big goals, your overarching goals for the year. And I'll walk you through the details around that when we get to it next week. Then step 3 is to break down those big goals within several dimensions, 3 or 4 dimensions that I'll share with you. And then step 4 is to plan ahead for obstacles. Things are not going to go according to plan. So let's plan ahead that things are not going to go according to plan, partially to avoid it and partially to, navigate through when those things happen. And then finally, we're going to set up a follow through system for you. So this isn't a scenario. I know I've been in this scenario so often, and you may have too, where you create this beautiful plan and then you literally never look at it again. I've definitely done that so often, and I don't want you to fall into that trap anymore. I've been able to get myself out of that trap for the last 4 years, at least, if not longer. And I want to make sure you are able to do that too. So that's the big picture, the 5 steps to your best 2023 in your independent consulting business. And today we're going to dive in deep into step 1, which is assessing 2022. Or like I said, if you're in the future, you might choose to assess year to date or the last 12 months, rolling 12 months. So with that, let's talk about the agenda. The agenda for today is, number 1, I want to talk with you about why are these assessments important. Don't go do the assessments just because I said to. Although I do love people just doing what I say to do, I will have to admit, just go do it. My family doesn't really appreciate that, but they're the ones who I'm always just kind of trying to order around. Anyway, I'm off track. I want to talk with you about why are these assessments important, so that you either get to the place where you agree with me for either the reasons I share or your own reasons, and therefore this becomes much more of a sticky process in your business, and not just one time Melissa told you to do this on the podcast, so you felt like you should, and then you don't end up creating this as part of your repeatable business operating system. I don't want that to happen. I want this to be a new habit that you have implemented in your business because it's so effective. So that's anyway why we're starting off with why are these assessments so important? And quite frankly, why do often we avoid doing them? And with that, I'll share with you some examples, and then we're gonna dive into the 8 best topics that you'll want to assess for your business, to give you a starting point in terms of what you want to be looking at. And then I'll share with you the 3 best questions you can be asking yourself and from what vantage point you would want to be asking yourself. And then we'll wrap it all up. So that is our agenda for today. With that, before we get into the details, I want to encourage you to do 2 things to complement this episode. The first is go download the workbook that goes with all 5 of the steps that I'm sharing with you. It's called the Yearly Planning Process for Independent Consultants. You can go to my website, melissalieberman.com/plan. melissalieberman.com/plan. Download that workbook, and then you'll have what you need to start completing today's assessment work that we're talking about, a step, and you'll also get a preview of what the next 4 steps are as well. So go download that so you have the yearly planning process. And then the other thing I decided to do for fun is to offer 20-minute strategy calls where we can hop on a Zoom call, talk about your strategy, what you've come up with once you've finished that yearly planning process. So go download the yearly planning process. As soon as you finish it, book one of these review calls. In 20 minutes, we're going to roll up our sleeves, really figure out for you where your blind spots might be, what else you might want to consider for your goals for next year, where you might be playing it safe, where your opportunities are, and get my eyes on your plan. That is a free call, just something fun I want to do for at least if the calendar is open. Again, if you're looking at this in the future, or quite frankly, if all the spots are taken, then that opportunity you may need to wait for the opportunity for me to open it back up again. So I would recommend going and grabbing those spots. I've already had a dozen or so taken just from some webinars that I've done. So with that, I really highly recommend you go and book one of those 2023 goal review calls, strategy calls. Again, it's you and I talking through the strategy. That is not a consultation for my coaching. If you want a consultation for my coaching, that's a different link. We'll put both of them in the show notes. But the 2023 goals review call is at icgoals.review. That is the URL. So the 2 letters IC as an independent consultant, goals with an S, .review. What a fun domain. Instead of .com, I grabbed .review. That's so fun. As an aside, if you do want to talk with me about coaching and private coaching, I do have a few spots opening up in January. So you can go to consultmelissa.com for that. Okay, so now that we've got those companion resources under our belt, let's start talking about why are assessments important for your business. I'll just use myself as an example to start with. I've heard about doing these assessments for a long time, I love reading self-help, and I love diving into all sorts of business books and constantly listening to podcasts and learning new things. Assessments are not anything new. This is something, and quite frankly, you probably did this too in corporate. You would do some form of an assessment, a career assessment, a performance assessment. All of these are very common, right? But for a long time in my business, I avoided doing this kind of assessment work. And I just want to make sure you don't make the same mistake that I made. I made this mistake telling myself, I see that, assessments are great, but I really don't have time for this. I have other stuff to do. And just, pretty soon it'll be like February. And then all my good intentions went out the window. And I would just say, well, now it's too late, so I'm not doing it. The other thing I would tell myself is, I didn't track enough data to do an assessment on my business. I'll get better at that this year and start doing assessments, going forward. Those are lies. Both of those were lies. Those were lies. I lied to myself. And if you're saying these same things to yourself, those are lies. Not a problem, not a bad person. We lie to ourselves quite frequently because that's how our brain is set up. So the truth of it is, for me, and this might be the same thing for you, is I just didn't want to look at the assessments. I didn't want to do the assessment because I was worried I would be disappointed. I was worried I would feel inadequate. I was worried I would feel regret. And of course, if I'm worried subconsciously about feeling bad doing these assessments, of course, I'm going to find excuses not to do them that seem really logical and practical, right? And so you might be in that same boat too, telling yourself, I don't have enough data, I didn't track enough, I don't have enough time, all the things, when in fact, if you're also a human, which I assume you are listening to this podcast, the truth of it is we avoid these types of things because we don't want to feel bad. So knowing that, and just having some grace with yourself, let's move forward. Let's move forward and say, you know what? I'm a business owner who's capable of feeling disappointed and doing it anyway. And that's ultimately what I did. I think for me, the initial internal conversation I was having with myself, the self-dialogue was, you know what? I'm a business owner who wants to take advantage of all of these data points that are available to me in my business so I can make better decisions moving forward. And I'm willing to feel overwhelmed and inadequate and disappointed in order to get that data for myself. That's when I finally started really treating my business as a business and not treating myself as, just kind of a fly-by-night sort of consultant. Treating this business and the process by which I was running it more seriously. I'm actually going to tell you how to have fun doing this assessment process here in a minute. So it doesn't have to be serious, not fun. It can be serious and fun. So that's a little, I'll tell you that here in a minute. But anyway, so I finally decided I'm going to go ahead and do these assessments that I, hear from and read in so many of these different books are helpful. And even though I didn't have necessarily all the data in place, I ended up realizing I had a lot more in place than I thought I had. I realized I made more money than I thought I had. I realized that I was offering a couple of different services in my business at the point at which I started doing these assessments. Now it's all coaching, private coaching. But before, I was doing some combination of coaching and consulting. And when I really looked at the data, I was astonished at how wrong I was. I was operating off of the assumption that, now I can't even remember at the time, but maybe 80% of my revenue or 90 was coming from consulting and 20% from coaching. And it was actually more like 50-50. I was shocked just because I was operating off of these assumptions. And quite frankly, what I thought was happening in my business that felt like a problem, that's just what I had kept cultivating in my mind without actually looking at the data. When I started this assessment process for myself, it opened everything up, because then I could see the facts on the piece of paper, and then I could start making different business decisions from that place. So hopefully that gives you an idea of, where you might be feeling resistance to this idea of putting assessments in place in your business. And I'll tell you what those will look like here in a minute, and why they can be so valuable for you to really get into this practice of looking at the math of your business, looking at both the qualitative and the quantitative information that's available to you about what's working in your business and what's not working in your business, what you want to amplify, what you want to not do anymore, what you want to adjust, and being able to make decisions from that place of facts versus assumptions and whatever your brain made up. Because when left unattended, our brain always makes up these crazy stories about what's happening or not happening that aren't usually true. Okay, so with that, now let me talk with you about an example from a client to also illustrate why these assessments can be so important in your business. So if you imagine just a continuum, so think of yourself, think to yourself like a line, right? A line that has maybe two arrows on either end, and that's as a continuum. And so I was working with a client, and she was telling me all these things about her business. It was early on in our work together, and telling me, where her clients were coming from, where they weren't coming from, how much she was making, all the basics of her consulting business. And so then I started asking more questions that were more, these were her interpretations of what was happening in her business, right? And so then I said, well, let's just look at the data. Look back and tell me, how many clients have you already worked with? Look forward and tell me, how much revenue have you already booked, but maybe you don't have the cash in hand yet? Tell me what your capacity and utilization numbers look like. And so as we worked together to put those frameworks in place, she was so surprised. She was so surprised about, in her mind, she thought, at the time, I think this particular conversation happened in maybe April or something like that. She thought she was already behind with respect to her goals. She thought she was going to have to work even harder and create this huge pipeline. And when we got down to the numbers of what had happened for her already, just in those 3 months of her business, when we did this assessment, she realized she was almost completely wrong about almost everything. She was wrong about what the clients look, what the kind of the dynamics of the clients were. They were actually shorter term engagements, at multiples at a time. The pricing was in a different place than she was thinking it was. She had generated more revenue than she realized. She had booked more revenue that was not yet invoiced or paid than she was giving herself credit for. She was essentially so much further along in her business metrics than she was giving herself credit for. And then I'll come back to that continuum in a minute, by the way. Then at the same time, she realized that if she was still going off of this idea that she had in her head that she was behind and she needed to book as much business as possible, that then she was going to be quickly overutilized and literally have no more hours left, working way more than she wanted to be working. So anyway, let me come back to this continuum. On the continuum, if you imagine this line, right, with the two arrows on either end, she's actually, let's say, 3/4 of the way on the arrow, all the way 3/4. She was thinking she was only 1/4 of the way down, on this continuum. She's, those little signs, you're here. It's like you're actually here, which is 3/4 of the way against her goal, versus where she thought she was, which was maybe like 1/4 or 1/3 of the way toward her goal. So again, doing an assessment is so important. And you might say, well, I'm really good with numbers. I really have a command of my business. And that could be true. You might have a really good command of the actual numbers and facts in your business. But if you're like most independent consultants, you have a really big opportunity to become more in command of your qualitative, of the data that's qualitative. And I'll share with you the questions you would want to be asking yourself, both quantitatively and qualitatively, here in a minute. Okay, so just to really pull this story together, think about it. I'll use some US-based terminology, but hopefully if you're a global listener, this will resonate with you. But think about it. If you're back in high school and you tried out for a sport, let's say basketball, and you made the junior varsity team. So that's kind of the lower level. We'll just call it the lower level team. It's not the varsity team, it's the junior varsity team. You think you're operating your business kind of like a junior varsity team member, when in fact, if you look at the data, again, both qualitative or quantitative, you might actually be on a college or university team. You're completely at the wrong vantage point. And as a result, if you're doing that to yourself, which, like I said, I've been there, I've done it. Independent consultants who are, really far along in their business, I find, are doing this. So no judgment if you're doing it. If you're doing it, what ends up happening is you make decisions from the wrong vantage point. If you think you're on the junior varsity team and you're actually on a D1 college team, university team, to use US terminology, think about it. What kind of decisions are you going to be making when it relates to pricing, or the types of services that you are providing, or the types of clients that you're working with, or the capacity and utilization that you want to target? You're going to be making decisions from the wrong vantage point, from that junior varsity team member versus the D1 university team member. It's a completely different game that you might not even realize what game you're playing. So we want to make sure that you've got these data points, both from again, qualitative and quantitative perspective, so that then you're setting yourself up with the reality that then you can build upon as you are deciding what you want to do for next year. So with that, hopefully I've convinced you how important these assessments are. I'm telling you, I used to avoid them at all costs with all excuses, and it's made the biggest difference in my business. Not just a yearly assessment, but assessing on a yearly basis, on a quarterly basis, and on a monthly basis. It's like a night and day tool. And that's why I am so emphatic about explaining to you why this is so important from my perspective. So now let's talk about what that assessment could look like for you. And we'll put these questions in the show notes. But the 8 questions that I love to start with, and then of course you'll want to add more questions based on your business and your own intuition about what's important. But if a few ideas in terms of a few starting points, I should say, rather, in terms of the quantitative questions are questions like, did you hit your 2022 revenue goal? Why or why not? Now, you might not have a revenue goal, or you might have forgotten what it was. So answer that question. If you don't, why didn't I set one? And get really clear about that. The second question, did you take all the time off that you planned, daily, weekly, for the overall year? Ask yourself that question. You may not have actually set those parameters, so do your best based off what you think your intentions were, and then make a note that next year you want to get more clear on these things so that you can evaluate them quantitatively. Then ask yourself, on a scale of 1 to 10, how fulfilled were you this past year? Why? Why that number? What would make it a 10? Question 4, what were your wins for the past year? And what was the impact on your business of those wins? Always start off with that good, positive question before you move into the next one, which is, what were the setbacks or disappointments that you had? And ask yourself, what was the impact of those setbacks or disappointments on your business? That question is so important, because just listing off the setbacks and disappointments, we could do that all day long. But did they actually have an impact on your business? That's such an important follow-on question, because then did it matter that you had those setbacks and disappointments? Then ask yourself 3 other questions that are really simple, but give so many, very open-ended, to give you so many data points on a qualitative perspective, or so many inputs, I should say, on a qualitative perspective. What went well? What didn't go well? And what do you want to do differently moving forward? Ask yourself those questions to get the ball rolling in terms of creating this assessment for yourself and a really good awareness of where you're at in a current state. Okay, then I said to you, I would share with you the 3 best questions to ask yourself. Now, this is something that's really important. Ask these questions from the perspective of the scientist and not from the perspective of the judge. We are not here to criticize ourselves or to feel like we should have done something differently or better or more correctly or whatever it is. That is not what we're doing here with respect to this entire conversation about assessments. What we are doing is getting data points that then can inform your future scientific experiments within your business. So those 3 best questions to ask yourself as you're pulling this data from your business, and things like, what was my revenue? Did I hit my revenue numbers? The 3 questions are why not, and what's the impact? So it's always those follow-on questions, like I just shared with you. On a scale of 1 to 10, how fulfilled were you? Don't forget the follow-on questions, which are why. Why is it that number? Why isn't it a 10? What's the impact of it being that number? And really dig deeper than just answering the questions on the surface. That's where you're going to get so much insight for yourself as you start planning out and using this as the baseline from which we're going to work on the next 4 steps here in the coming weeks. So with that, this is the first step of the process for you to have your best year yet as an independent consultant in 2023. Go download that workbook that I shared with you. It's at melissalieberman.com/plan. Fill out the whole workbook, the yearly planning process, and then don't forget to book your 2023 goals review with me at icgoals.review. And again, if this happens to be in the future, you're listening to this in 2024, go look at that link. It might still be there. All right. Thank you for tuning in today. Do not miss next week's episode, where we're going to talk about you setting your big vision for your business. All right. I will see you then. Take care.